Sometimes when I sleep, I dream about it, about the war here. People getting shot, and I keep thinking, what bullet is marked for me? Is it real, or did I just dream about it?
A lonely island in the Pacific, Iwo Jima. It would be the Marine Corps' bloodiest battle. It would also be the toughest test for one of America's secret weapons. Not a gun or a bomb, but an ancient language spoken only by a people called the Navajo.
That in this place called Iwo Jima, all of those
50 years after the battle, over 1,000 veterans, American and Japanese, have returned to commemorate one of World War II's most deadly killing grounds.
utmost loyalty and selfless dedication, and many gave their utmost here.
Marine Corps veteran Sam So was a code talker, one of the Navajo whose voice held the keys to victory at Iwo Jima. A 100 years before the war, these canyons were the battlefield, and the Navajo's adversary not a people from across the Pacific, but the United States itself. Legend holds that their warriors used a secret language on raids against their enemies. Even after they were confined to the reservation, the Navajo held proudly to their culture, their language, and their lands. Today, their herds still roam a reservation that stretches across parts of 3 southwestern states. And men like Sam So grew up in a remote Navajo world.
My father doesn't speak English, and I didn't speak English at all. I would say maybe I was either 9 or 10. And at the time, I have never seen a white man or woman. I have never seen a house at all.
But for Sam and his generation, Navajo traditions were under attack. Children from the reservation were being sent to schools where the words and ways of the white man were forced upon them.
You were restricted from talking your native tongue. You were to speak English only. You pick up those little pieces.
Keith Little also served as a code talker. Like Sam, he was born to the Navajo language but schooled in a foreign tongue.
You can't converse in English when you don't know the language to begin with. So you walk around, being like a blind person. But you have to get your message across some way. Your talking Navajo was reported to your superior. Anyway, you were punished one way or another.
But these young men and their language, the heart of the culture the white man tried so hard to wipe out, would help turn the tide in the Pacific War. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor crippled the Pacific Fleet. As American forces fought back, they discovered that the enemy could crack our codes and read battlefield messages almost at will. A new, unbreakable code had to be found. Convinced that Navajo-speaking signalmen would baffle Japan's best code breakers, the Marine Corps turned to the reservation for recruits.
When you become a Marine, you have to, if your sergeant tells you to jump in the lake, you jump in the lake. You can't say simplified, always faithful.
Keith Little and Sam So have met to share memories in Navajo fry bread. Many traditions still thrive on the reservation, but the Navajo tongue, like memories of the Pacific War, is strongest for older generations.
When you first joined the Marines, did you guys know you'd become code talkers?
Well, for me, I didn't have any idea that I would be joining the Marines at all. All I know is I got drafted.
My birthday was March the 4th. And when that March the 4th came, I became 17 years old, and I hustled to the Marine Corps recruiting station.
On the reservation, Navajo men, young and old, were lining up to fight for America, despite their bitter history.
All I know was that this is our land. When I heard it was being bombed, being attacked by some enemy, then it didn't set too well with me.
In all, nearly 4,000 Navajo left the world of the reservation to join a world at war. Some 400 would serve as code talkers with the U.S. Marines. From Guadalcanal to Okinawa, the Navajo signalmen strung phone lines. They hauled field radios and fought on the front lines. Yet of all their duties, none was more crucial than turning their language into secret words of war. Subtle tones and complex structures make Navajo all but impossible for outsiders to understand. On the battlefield, it made an unbreakable code. The Marines' warrior language started with the English alphabet. Common Navajo words stood for individual letters, and the code talkers simply spelled out the messages.
We sent it as a code, and then it'll be received on the other end as a regular message. Like if Sam, if I talk to him from here, and my commanding officer gives me a message, a plain English message, and I sent it in Navajo code, and Sam will write it down on the other end as plain English as I got it from my commanding officer.
If it's in Navajo, the other guy will say, message for Arizona. That means they want a Navajo code talker to receive the message.
To confuse the enemy further, they played word games and used metaphors.
We call rockets, ground boiler. When they hit the ground, it's like the ground is boiling. That's just rock flying all over. Hand grenade, namasi, potato. Tahiti means hummingbird in English. We used to call that fighter plane.
Hummingbirds and iron fish, ground boilers and potatoes. On an island called Iwo Jima, Navajo would be the language of war. February 19th, 1945. The largest assault force the Marine Corps had ever assembled lay poised off Iwo Jima.
As far as I can see, there were ships steaming ahead. And my gosh, I thought, with this many, we can overrun this island in one day and go home.
But one day would turn to more than 30 before the Marines would control this place. A fly speck of rock, just 8 square miles, Iwo Jima held airfields vital to the final approach and invasion of Japan. That made it a rock worth dying for.
And it was raining, it was slick that day, and we were wet and cold.
Code talkers hit the beach with the opening waves of the attack. At first, the Japanese held their fire. Then they sprang the trap.
You get that withering fire. It looked to you that it is impossible to survive it. Impossible to come out alive, to even lift your head. It's awfully scary. On Ewo it was like that.
Getting beyond the beachhead became a nightmare for radio man and rifleman alike.
And I look over here and say, how can people survive with all that shelling and bombing?
The communication was flowing around in Navajo. Emergency situations arise like a unit is pinned down. They need heavy fire into the target area so that the unit can get out of there.
Calling in reinforcements and supporting fire, reporting casualties and enemy movements, the signalmen were the lifeline of the attack. Their bulky radios made the Navajo a clear target for snipers. But for their officers, there was an even greater threat: capture and the breaking of the code.
Yeah, I remember that. He says, I want you guys to protect this goddamn Indian because we need him. He's got secrets that cannot be understood by the Japs. He didn't call them Japs, he called them gooks.
Iwo Jima was not just an island. It was a fortress Japan had carved out of volcanic rock. Every outcrop bore heavy guns. Caves and blockhouses led to miles of tunnels. And in the tunnels, an invisible army, 22,000 strong.
In some of these pillboxes there are tunnels running from one pillbox to the next one. So when they start bombing, they go in there underground there. When they lift up the bombardment, they come back up and get out there, and then there are machine guns there.
I never saw an enemy, a live enemy. Everything was quiet. Everything was spooky. Weird, you might say.
In their underground strongholds, outmanned, outgunned, the Japanese refused to surrender. Their orders were to fight to the death, taking as many Marines with them as they could.
We just have to find ways to get to the pillboxes. Throw a grenade in there, or if you can, get a flamethrower up there and shoot flames into their cave. And you can hear them yelling in there when you get them.
As the Marines pushed deeper into the island, they left a trail of corpses. In traditional Navajo belief, evil will come to those who walk among the dead. And Iwo Jima had become Chi'idi-ta, a land of the dead.
Me and a commanding officer were in a crater, a bomb crater. And I guess I had my head up a little bit. And he came around and grabbed my foot and said, "Hey, you move over, you're too high, somebody might shoot you." He laid down where I was. He just laid down where I just had moved. And a sniper bullet cut him in between the eye. He didn't even move, he just fell over. And things like this, you know, you wonder why. Why did I survive when I should have been the one that got shot? See? These things always hang around with you, these thoughts.
For the infantryman on the ground, war can seem senseless. Still, every battle has its cause. Iwo Jima was one of the final stepping stones to Tokyo. With the island's airfields in Allied hands, the war would be all but over.
It took a lot of fighting. When they took this airfield there, the ones that go ahead, some of them get shot and fall. There's always another one behind it.
Even while still a battlefield, the landing strip began saving American lives. Now, bombers crippled in raids on Japan had a last-ditch place to land.
And all of a sudden we heard an airplane coming in from the side there. I think it was a bomber. And then we found out their plane was a little shot up. They land and the guys were wounded. I believe some of them were crying. And then they grabbed some of the Marines there. They were so happy that they made it here.
In the end, Iwo Jima cost the lives of over 6,000 Americans, 1/3 of all the Marines killed in combat in the war. Of 22,000 Japanese, barely 1,000 would survive. But for America, the price would have been far greater had it not been for the Navajo and a language the white man had once scorned.
I think the Navajo tribe, I think they've done the right thing, regardless of how badly they were treated in the past. They still were willing to protect their land. They were willing to protect people that punished them, willing to protect people that conquered them. There's not a code talker that's going to say, the heck with the United States, the heck with America. They're going to say, this is my mother, this is my land, this is my everything that I have is right here.
Navajo custom called for the returning warriors to leave the ghosts of war behind. Still, no power could make them forget all they had seen and done.
I keep thinking about it, and I got nightmares of it. Now that I came here, I found out all the shelling holes, all the trees that were battered have grown back up, and it looks peaceful to me. I think seeing this here today will help me get over my nightmares.